Before there was bodybuilding, before there was CrossFit, and before there was powerlifting, there was this. Men in kilts tossing logs in the Scottish Highlands, dock workers in Iceland deadlifting ship's anchors, and farmers, laborers, and soldiers testing who among them was truly the strongest. Strongman wasn't born in a gym, it was born in the real world, in blood, grit, and in stone. We had Kazmaier roaring, Geoff Capes lifting Atlas stones, and Jon Páll Sigmarsson shouting,
to be alive if you can't do that.
Now, in the late 1970s, World's Strongest Man brought those feats to TV screens for the first time. It was chaos. Refrigerators on backs and producing this viral clip.
Franco moving quickly, and he's injured his left leg.
Cars pulled by hand, steel bent like twigs, and the world fell in love with giants. Kazmaier, Jon Páll Sigmarsson, Magnus for Magnusson, Mariusz Pudzianowski, Big Z, icons who made strength mythical again. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The crowds got smaller, the prize money got smaller, and as social media exploded, strongman, the sport that birthed modern strength culture, started to fade into the background. Of course, this is an anecdotal observation on my behalf, but I so often get middle-aged people coming up to me talking about Magnus for Magnusson, or young kids asking if I know Eddie Hall, or even people telling me that I should get into strongman because I seem perfect for the world's strongest man. That's a true story. After I'd already won World's Strongest Man. This makes me think that the sport's getting much smaller, but in other ways, strongman seems to be thriving. There was a dip in prize money at one time, but higher prize money than ever right now. And strongmen are fortunate enough to have nice cars and big houses that they might not have been able to have before. So today we have to ask the question that no one in the world of iron or in strongman wants to face. Is strongman dying, or is it just evolving to something we haven't seen before? This really dives into the question after Strongest Man on Earth is up in the air right now, and one of our major shows could be gone. And it's because it didn't make money. But why? And are other shows making money? And where is the real money in strongman? Because I'm telling you, there's plenty. Now, strongman didn't just build muscle, it built mythology. And for the first time, the world had strongman celebrities. This is all the way back in the 1970s. Athletes so powerful, so charismatic that they turn feats of strength into entertainment.
To be alive if you can't do that.
And whilst Jon Páll Sigmarsson won World's Strongest Man 4 times, a large part of why he was so popular is because he was such a character. He was the first true superstar. He wasn't just strong, he was electric. He screamed, he laughed, he celebrated every lift like it was his last. He shouted, he screamed, he intimidated opponents, he had fun, and he was larger than life. He won those 4 World's Strongest Man titles and made the sport feel alive. To Iceland, he wasn't just an athlete, he was a national hero. And tragically, his story ended the same way that it began, under a barbell in his own gym chasing another impossible lift. Then another legend came along, Geoff Capes. This is across the sea in Britain, of course, and Geoff Capes became the face of strongman for a generation. He passed away just last year, and that's when I learned how pivotal Geoff was in popularizing strongman over in the UK. He was not only a strength athlete, but he was a world-class shot putter turned into a strongman, and he had Olympic pedigree. But he also had that everyman charisma. He appeared on talk shows, cereal boxes, kids programs, and for millions, Geoff Capes was strongman. He was the giant that you could actually root for. This clip of Geoff Capes is one of my favorite when it's him versus Jon Páll Sigmarsson in the tug of war. And Jon Páll looks incredibly muscular, incredibly strong. And to be honest, Geoff Capes looks like a strong dad, but he pulls him into the water with absolutely no effort whatsoever. Our next legend of the sport is current World's Strongest Man referee. In comes Magnus for Magnusson, the technician, the 4 times World's Strongest Man champion, and where Jon Páll was fire, Magnus was ice, both from Iceland, but Magnus had precision, composure, and control. And he didn't just win, he mastered the sport. And honestly, I attribute a lot of my success to similar tactics. He turned strongman from chaos into craft. And in my opinion, this was the start of a shift from strongman as a circus event into a true sport. Now, these men built the foundation of strongman. This was before social media, before big sponsorships were touted across digital platforms, and before even prize money that could pay their bills. They carried the sport on their backs, and they made strength and strongman something people wanted to watch and what it turned into today. They made us believe that being strong could make you legendary, and they were. But of course, that golden age didn't last forever. It never does. The cameras faded, the budget shrink, and the world became more and more obsessed with bodybuilders and fitness models and aesthetics, and they started to forget the giants who started it all. The very late 1990s, after Magnus from Magnusson left the sport, into the early 2000s seems to be a bit of a lull in strongman before Mariusz Pudzianowski came around. He looked like a Greek god, and Mariusz capitulated himself to the top of strongman lore by becoming the most successful world's strongest man ever with 5 titles to his name. Of course, there's some debate with the IFSA split and Zydrunas and how many could he have won, but nonetheless, he is number 1 with 5 titles. The end of his era marked the beginning of another, and an interesting evolution in the sport where the true celebrities came back. But they came back in a very different way. Now, every sport has its renaissance, and for strongman, it came, in my opinion, with the next generation of absolute monsters. This was the era of giants. And to me, this is when strongman peaked in a certain way. We had Brian Shaw, the strategist at 6'8", well over 400 pounds, a man built like a mountain, but who approached the sport like a scientist. He studied every implement, every rep, every calorie, and he won World's Strongest Man 4 times. And he was the first to turn strongman into being a brand. He's done this through Evolution Athletics, through Undefined Nutrition, through the Shaw Classic, and he is a name outside the sport. We'll talk about how he did that in a second, but he brought professionalism, education, and longevity to a sport that once lived and died by chaos. I believe he was at World's Strongest Man something like 16 or 17 times, which is absolutely absurd. Then, of course, there was the best of all time, or what people believe to be the best of all time, Zydrunas Savickas, or Big Z. And if Magnus was ice and Jon Páll was fire, Zydrunas was stone. He was immovable, cold, and absolute strength. He has 7 Arnold's titles, 4 World's Strongest Man wins, countless world records. He won IFSA as well, which was the world champion at the time, if we're being honest with ourselves. But ask any strongman who the best ever was, and most will say Big Z. We also had Eddie Hall, who brought something totally different, almost a combination between Zydrunas and Jon Páll Sigmarsson, where he didn't just lift weights, he lifted the culture. He brought strongman back into lore, almost like Geoff did in the UK, and blew it up into mainstream popularity. When he pulled 500 kilos in 2016, it was the first time strongman had trended worldwide. He turned the sport into a show, tattoos, blood, adrenaline, and a lot of storytelling. Now, love him or hate him, Eddie Hall made strongman mainstream again. And speaking of hate him, Thor Bjornsson, the Mountain, the 4th giant of the era of giants, an athlete who also transcended the sport entirely. From Icelandic champion to global celebrity, he brought eyes to strongman that hadn't been there since Jon Páll. He made millions see that just being strong wasn't about lifting alone, it was about presence. Now, I've seen this myself. When I compete against Thor, there is more non-strongman fans who watch than ever because they don't understand the rules. They don't understand the point system. They argue things that make no sense whatsoever. And to me, that's always a positive sign. Now, they're always arguing against me, but if they're watching the sport and they've never watched it before, that is a great thing. Now, between Brian, Zydrunas, Eddie, and Thor, they defined the modern era. They built empires of iron and influence, and for a decade, they carried strongman back into the global spotlight, made strength cool again, and really ushered in a new generation. But they did it in a different way. Now, Zydrunas has the love of strongman, every strongman fan for being the GOAT, of course, but the other 3 are more famous, despite Zydrunas being more accomplished. Eddie, Brian, and Thor transcended strongman in a way that no strength athlete had ever done before. And what about now? We have Tom Stolman, who overcame difficulties with autism to become a 3-time world's strongest man. We have myself, the educated marathon runner who has done all the extremes. We've got Trey Mitchell, the true Texan, Evan Singleton, the larger-than-life personality ready to entertain crowds. We all have nicknames, so on and so forth. These things were never really said in the same ways about guys in the past. It mostly began and ended with he is big and strong, and he is bigger and stronger, and he looks shredded, and he's an animal, so on and so forth. But it's not the same stories that are being told anymore. And let's talk about the shows themselves right now that we compete in, because it paints to me a bit of a grim picture, but stick around because it doesn't all sound grim. We have the Strongman Champions League, which is a cool concept, extremely international, but you can't really make a living. Winnings aren't confirmed, and I've never competed in any of these shows, but for a normal SCL show, I've heard rumors that it's maybe a few $1,000s to win, and some people don't have their flights covered, and some people don't have their accommodation. Now, this could be accurate or inaccurate, but regardless, SCL on average is a bit of a break even for most guys who participate. We have Giants Live, a profitable strongman endeavor that is only working in the UK right now, and we didn't see it take off when we brought it over to Vegas, but there are hopes to expand it again. But right now, it's reliant on the rabid UK fan base and the close proximity by keeping everything on the island. This is possible to make a living in these shows, but only if you perform at the very top. Regardless, Giants Live is a great tour that has the legs to keep strongman ticking for a long time to come, but I don't believe it's enough alone to carry the sport forever. Then we have the big four. We've got the Arnold, which is propped up by huge expo numbers, 250,000 people through every weekend, and so many fitness people in the space come. Then we have the Rogue Invitational, a promotional event for Rogue Fitness, and it's a marketing expense. Then we have Strongest Man on Earth, which lost money this year. This is the reason for the video. It might not come back. Then we have World's Strongest Man, which is very difficult to know what they're on about financially because they claim to lose money, but they also claim to have 220 million viewers worldwide. And for context, the Super Bowl has 128 million viewers and is rumored to have a budget of $100 million. I don't believe that World's Strongest Man has a budget of $100 million. So there's either a big disconnect between the number of viewers that they claim and reality, or they've signed some really bad deals, or they're making tens of millions of dollars. I don't believe the latter to be true. Maybe the 220 million isn't necessarily true. So we won't really dig into exactly if World's Strongest Man is profitable or not. But where does it leave us? We won't dive into exactly the World's Strongest Man viewership numbers. It's not useful for this. But where does this leave us? We've got a profitable World's Strongest Man competition, a profitable World's Strongest Man feeder system with Giants Live. We've got the Rogue Invitational subsidized by the marketing budget of Rogue Fitness. We've got the Arnold propped up by a massive expo. And of course, Giants Live that can help out the pockets of the athletes, but doesn't create full-time careers. And simply put, we have World's Strongest Man as a standalone series that turns a real substantial profit as a business, generates attention and revenue. But with its feeder system of Giants Live doing the same, we don't really have a consistent way to say this is a pathway by which people can be a full-time strongman. But has strongman ever really had full-time athletes? And we do have them today, so how is it done? Well, in the past, Jon Páll Sigmarsson, Magnusson, Big Z, Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall all had their primary income from strength sports, sponsorships, and appearances. Now, thankfully, it's not all bad news of where strongman's at right now, but I think the sport will have to pivot slightly in the coming years. I've just come back from Battle of the Beasts, and that is an incredibly encouraging, different endeavor that I hope you guys get to see soon, and I think will cast strongman in a really exciting light. Now, right now, athletes can make a living through merchandise sales, sponsorships, appearances, and most interestingly, social media outlets, which is where I believe the sport will need to pivot. Right now, all your favorite athletes make more on social media than they do actually competing. And the money on social media that the major competitions can generate is incredible. In fact, I know for a fact that World's Strongest Man has made a heap of money from Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, and other media sources. If I just take generally what I have and generally what they do, they're a minimum 7 figures, but my reasonable guess would be low 8 figures annually on World's Strongest Man content alone. Now, this isn't to expose anyone. That could be for another video at another time. Shows that don't make money cannot be counted on for the long run. Now, what is social media saying about strongman? Well, it's growing rapidly, and the opportunity to take advantage of it is huge. The good news is that you don't need to be at the world's strongest man to take advantage of it. Even a novice competitor can become a strength sport influencer of sorts. Now, Paul O'Dwyer is a great example of this. Not that he was a novice competitor, but he wouldn't have made much in strongman when competing. He was a super entertaining, middle of the pack guy at Giants Live, but post strongman, his social media presence has been better than he could ever do in strongman. And he would say the same. And I say that as a massive compliment. He had a YouTube channel that was kind of doing okay. Then he started making videos on Instagram, calling people, not nice words, who aren't exhibiting positive culture in the gym in the comments of different fitness posts. Now, he put these videos on Facebook. He made merchandise. He lost a bunch of weight, launched an app, and by all metrics, he's crushing it. So sure, being a top-level strongman can be a good payday, but it can also be a launch pad. But back to my assessments. Is strongman dying? I say kind of. Guys like Magnus for Magnusson and Jon Páll Sigmarsson, who made a living without social media because it doesn't exist, could make a lot more money for appearances because people couldn't see them at the time. If you wanted to watch a strongman show, you had to go travel and watch it. Where now you can see whoever you want, whenever you want, online or through competitions through an exponentially cheaper live stream option. You can also just forego live streams altogether and catch all the best lifts in 5-second clips on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. Save yourself a ton of time, a ton of money, and get the same enjoyment from the sport. But strongman isn't dying because it creates another incredible opportunity. What sport is better suited for short form content on social media? What sport would produce that virality over and over again for brands to stand behind and endorse the athletes? Now, sure, the big four in North America, the big four sports that is, and the Premier League players, sure, they make a huge amount, and sure, they can be exploited on social media better, but you can only watch so many dunks before a dunk is a dunk, and so many soccer goals, and usually they'll have to be packaged together, and it's difficult for that to really take off on something like Instagram. But even a sport like hockey doesn't garner the social following of strongman. Strongman is thriving in the digital space, and strongman fame creates less of a guarantee that people are going to pick up the phone to call you, and more of an opportunity. In other words, appearances will drop because you're appearing every day online, but the opportunity to grow your social media, engage with fans like never before, and build a community is higher than ever. And this is what I think shows really need to lean into, because people like Giants Live and World's Strongest Man, while the show itself might not be a massive revenue generator, their social content off the back of it absolutely is. So if the careers in strongman are not really about appearing places anymore, and they're more about what you can do online, it creates an incredible opportunity for a lot of people. First, for top-level athletes, the best thing that you guys can do to support is go follow their social media journeys. I'll pop all of the YouTubes of the guys competing right now in the comments, and go ahead and subscribe, check out their videos and see what they're doing. And it's a great way for you to give your attention, and ultimately right now, attention is money, and give it to them for free. And this will continue to have the sport thrive. Opportunity number 2 is for people who aren't at the top level. Well, if you can create good, engaging content on social media, it could also be your career. And the more people who strongman is their career, the more attention we'll get on the sport, the more people are watching, and the better off everyone in the sport does. And number 3, what I think really has to happen is that shows other than World's Strongest Man and Giants Live need to start leaning into the ability to generate revenue off of social media. If they do, they can make a huge revenue source outside of the competition itself, and accept that the competition itself will not be the biggest revenue generator. If I were to start a show right now, I would have a relatively small crowd in a very small venue with the best quality cameras I can. I'd have tons of people capturing social media content from every angle. I'd do a couple of trends. I'd do some funny things. And these are efforts that a lot of shows aren't making right now, but this is the pivot that I believe needs to happen. And if this doesn't happen and they continue to try the traditional sport route, it's going to be an uphill battle, especially as people's pockets are tightening up as much as ever. There's less disposable income. It's more difficult to afford everyday life. And that's probably not going to improve generation over generation. Well, and we lean into the social side to become characters on social media who lift huge weights. Well, what are the chances that in the future, there's a couple of big titles and otherwise strongman becomes a social media influencer space? It might not be where the old school guys want it to go. It might be not in the nature of a lot of people to do, but my intuition says that this could be the reality in the more near future than you would think. If we take World's Strongest Man and Giants Live out of the picture, if Rogue decided that they didn't want to invest in strongman like they did before, the Rogue Invitational would not include strongman, and the Arnold would have to find a new major sponsor. And it's possible that the Arnold turns around and says, we already have 250,000 tons of booths. We don't need strongman like we did before. And what's going to happen to the Arnold once Arnold dies? Hopefully that's a long time from now. But it's possible that the Rogue Invitational is gone, the Strongest Man on Earth is gone, and the Arnold is gone, and all we're left with is World's Strongest Man and the World's Strongest Man feeder tour. If that's the case, we have to be proactive to continue to grow the sport. We have to engage with the sport as much as possible. We have to encourage grassroots, but we have to get ourselves on social media. And frankly, that's where careers are made right now. Not in appearances, not in business opportunities. Those come off the back of social media presence. That's my opinion. Strongman is dying in some mainstream metrics, but it's thriving like never before in a digital space that will only continue to grow as our traditional metrics in every sport continue to shrink. Thank you for watching, guys. As always, lift heavy, be kind. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I would love your thoughts down in the comments. Do you believe that strongman is in a little bit of trouble right now? Do you agree with my assessments, or do you think I'm speaking nonsense? If you have nothing else to say, put a moose dropping down below, subscribe to the channel, and until tomorrow, lift heavy and be kind.